Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to Hi Mama's podcast webinar with our guest, Barb O'Neill from Transforming. Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to Hi Mama's. Apologies for that. We're just going to do a quick little introduction here before we play our podcast. Barb, would you like to say hello to everyone?
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here, and I look forward to being able to answer your questions after we listen to the podcast.
Great. Thanks. So we're going to kick this off. We thought it would be really great to transform our podcast episodes into another format so other people can listen to it. If you're not regularly a podcast listener or you haven't subscribed to the preschool podcast yet, we thought we would offer it to you, our educators, as a free resource where you can listen to the podcast and then you can ask Barb questions about her materials right after live in the YouTube chat. That's right on the right-hand corner. To submit a question, you need to make sure you're logged in to YouTube or have a Gmail account, and then you can log in to see to participate in the chat. So I'm going to get things started with our podcast, and you can hear all about this great topic on improv-based play support for working with children and challenging behaviors. Just a reminder that at this point, if you've made it this far, but you don't hear us and you're having any challenges hearing us, make sure you check that sound icon in the left-hand corner. You're not hearing me describe this if you don't have audio, but definitely check your sound if you're having any troubles. And you can always send us a question into the chat. If for some reason you're not signed into Gmail or a YouTube account, but you still want to send a question, please feel free to tweet at us at Hi Mama Social, and we'll post your question for you to the chat. You can also email us at info@himama.com, and we'll get that question right to Barb. Before I kick off the podcast, I just want to mention that today, for all of you listeners, we have a special offer. Barb's offering a free resource. Make sure you download her No More Challenging Behavior cheat sheet. Now, that's available on Barb's website, transformchallengingbehavior.com, and she'll tell us a bit more about those resources later. But please make sure you go down and download that free resource. It is an awesome thing for you guys to get on a Friday afternoon. Or Friday morning on the West Coast. All right, so bear with us for 2 seconds while we queue up the podcast, and then we will be back to ask some questions after.
I started out working as a floater aide in a child care center. And I, since then, have worked as a preschool teacher, special ed teacher. I went on to get my master's in early childhood special ed. And then I got my doctorate in early childhood. And so I worked as a early childhood professor for about 8 years, and part of that time I was also a campus center director. And now I'm doing consulting and training with early childhood programs around behavior and helping teachers and directors with children's behavior.
And why have you chosen that specific area of children's behavior versus the many other directions you could have taken your career with that background that you have?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have always been very oriented towards helping those children who seem to be struggling in the classroom. And that's part of why I decided to education as well as early childhood, and worked for a little while as a in New York, what we call a SEIT, special education itinerant teacher. So I would go to different private schools, supporting children who qualified for services. I noticed that the teachers that I was working to support and supporting the teachers struggled the most who also had behavioral problems. So, you know, there's if you think of like concentric diagram, right? Disabilities, and there's children who behavioral challenge, and then there's overlap. And it just seemed that in some ways the behavioral issues were the bigger struggle. And when I was a professor and I was researching different methods for fostering inclusion of children with disabilities, what I discovered was the methods that I was studying to support the inclusion of children with disabilities also could be helpful for children with presenting behavioral challenges. So I just decided that was really the bigger focus that I want to focus on. And it's just a huge issue in the field. I mean, I don't meet a center director or teacher who says, I never struggle with behavior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's certainly a consistent challenge, I think, across all childcare and early learning programs for sure. And it's such a complicated subject, I think, as well, which makes it also so difficult to tackle. So I read up a little bit about some of your work, and one of the methods that you are quite supportive of and teach through your consultancy work is improv-based play support.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us what that means?
Sure, absolutely. This is something that I'm super passionate about. So I'm so happy to get the chance to speak with you about it and to share it with your listeners. About 10 or 15 years ago, I had the opportunity to study at the Eastside Institute in New York City, which is a place that trains professionals, not just in early childhood at all, but really across different fields in a method they call social therapeutics. And it's a methodology that has at the heart of it, one of the pieces is studying theater improvisation as a tool to promote development. And so as a special education teacher, I took those ideas into my teaching and just found them to have really a huge and positive impact in my work. And so basically the main idea is in improv, we say anything anyone says or does is an offer. And so in children's play, that could be banging blocks together. That could be, rocking a baby. That could be saying, "Are you hungry?" in dramatic play. So anything anyone says or does is an offer. And the job of the improviser is to say yes and to offers. So that doesn't mean that we're going to let children do whatever they want or climb on the tables. But as an improviser, I'm always trying to find ways to say yes and build on children's offers. So that's anything they initiate in play, their interests, their strengths. I'm trying to creatively build on those to support their play. And actually, it's something that you can take that paradigm, like looking at what children are doing and what's happening in the classroom through the lens of improv and this idea of yes and, you can do that all day long. So I've had teachers who I've trained in the approach who say, you know, this one teacher I have in mind said, oh, I always knew I needed to be a responsive teacher and be responsive to what children put out there, but I didn't really understand how to do that or have a method for it until I started to study improv with you and we do games to develop those muscles of saying yes and creatively building on your co-players' offers.
Can you give us an example of something, activities in the classroom, for example, where you would apply this yes and method?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so you can really apply it in any activity. I mean, activities that are more child directed. Well, I don't even want to say that, because actually in circle time or a teacher director activity, you can apply it too. It just looks a little differently. But my favorite is dramatic play, just because in dramatic play, we really have a great opportunity to help children start to interact with their peers and develop in the preschool years those cooperative pretend play skills. Mm-hmm. So I'll give an example of a little girl that I worked with, where this was actually when I was working as a center director. I was working to teach some of the teachers I was supervising this method because they wanted to learn it from me. And there was a little girl who mostly played by herself, and she was playing in dramatic play. And so when I went over to play with her, she was playing with a baby. And so I went and sat near her and I took out a baby also. And then she actually got up and left and went to the library area of the classroom. And so I share this example because it's an example where that was not the offer I was looking for, right? I was like, okay. And, you know, and I'm supposed to be teaching the teachers how to do this. And I was like, wow, how do I do that? But I just said to myself, okay, you have to stick to the method. So how do I say yes and to that offer, even when it's not the offer I was looking for? And so I gave her a few minutes, and then she had taken the baby with her to the library. And I know some classes are very strict about you have to stay in your area, but that was not the way this classroom ran. So it was okay that she went over there. And I followed her with my baby, and lo and behold, you might see where this is going. She got up and then she went back to the dramatic play area. So I had to really, be creative. So I would wait a little bit, and I didn't want to crowd her or force her to play with me. So I went back over to dramatic play, and this time I sat a little bit further away, and I kind of put my back to her, actually, to be like, no, I'm not here for you. And it took several back and forths, but eventually she went back to the library, and she had this time a blanket and a baby doll with her. So I, just mirrored what she was doing. I mirrored the materials choices. So I took the blanket and the baby doll, and when I got there, I saw she had put her baby doll down, so I put mine down, and then she started waving her blanket and, kind of shaking it out like as you might do if you're setting up at the beach. So I did that as well, and much to my amazement, she didn't run off, and she put her blanket down, so I mirrored that and put mine down. And then she ended up laying down on her blanket, and so I lay down on mine, and we were facing each other, and she looked at me and she smiled and giggled a little bit. And so that was a really magical moment for me of connecting with a child who was really slow to warm up, but I was really following her lead there. And we worked with her doing this improv-based play support over many months and really saw her develop as a leader in the play at times. And one time her father came in and saw she was kind of leading this little dress up parade around the classroom. And so that father thought, oh, okay, this is a, child who doesn't always connect socially with the other children, but there she is, they're following her. And we eventually saw her to go on to be interactive with her peers in dramatic play. But to form the basis for that, I had to first follow her lead as opposed to, insist to her, okay, it's time to, do some cooking, or let's put the babies to bed. That came later, where I would initiate some things, and her teachers worked with her in a similar way, following her lead and then making suggestions to her.
Yeah, that's a really phenomenal example and a very interesting and fascinating one. And it occurs to me that patience seems to be a really key factor, with this example specifically, but I imagine in a lot of other scenarios as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think it's, I always say when I'm teaching teachers this improv-based play support, you can't evaluate it's not an activity where you have like a lesson plan with a very clear objective of what you're teaching that day. So I also, when I teach this method, I teach the different skills children need during play and the sequence for dramatic play from solitary to parallel, associative, and then cooperative. But you have to know which level that child's at and continue to make offers to help them develop new play skills. But you can't evaluate whether you were successful on any one day. You have to really make a commitment. I'm going to play with this child, and it can just be 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes. You're playing with that child and others in the area. I'm going to do it once a week for X weeks or whatever it is, because I know teachers are juggling so many different things. But, you may learn later, you may see evidence of something that child learned from the experience, and see them initiate with a peer something that you did with them weeks later. So you really can't evaluate it in the short run a lot of times.
Yeah, and I think oftentimes they're taking in a lot more information and learnings than you might think they are at the time.
Mm-hmm.
One thing we always like to cover on the Preschool Podcast as well is the why behind things. And so maybe you can tell us a little bit more about why this method works versus other methods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think, well, again, I sort of work in these overlapping areas of including children with disabilities and with children who are presenting challenging behavior. And so one of the things I'm always mindful of is that, we definitely have research that shows for children who do have disabilities, whether that's, and in many cases in early childhood, they're not even diagnosed yet, or if it's a developmental delay, teachers may suspect it, but children aren't receiving services. But what the special education research tells us is that if we want to have inclusive classrooms, we can't just plop children in there and expect them to excel. That the recommendations really are that teachers need to support children's play to help them engage with materials in the classroom and to help them to develop those social connections. And I think teachers, don't always, they're juggling so many things. And also we have these ideas in early childhood, a lot of times, that we do want children to initiate their play. And so sometimes that can go to the extreme to feel that we shouldn't interrupt it. But for children who, a lot of times teachers tell me, oh, I'm really struggling with Michael, he won't stay focused on an activity. He's just flitting around the classroom, and then he gets into trouble. He's climbing on the shelf, or he's throwing things. So again, it doesn't have to be children who are there in terms of inclusion because they have a special need, but I think it is a special need to need some help to engage with materials, and then if you're exhibiting challenging behavior. So this is a method that teachers can use to build a rapport with children. So if they're in a negative cycle with the behavior and they're getting into daily power struggles, it helps switch that around. If we go into children's play and follow their lead, we're sending the message that their interests are valued and important and the play is valued. So it builds that rapport. It also can help them sustain engagement when the adult goes in and plays with them. And then as time goes on, you can make suggestions or offers for interacting with peers. And you can do that to the child who needs the support, and or you can suggest that the peer initiate, right? So you might have someone who's a more advanced player and is very open to following teacher directions, and you can just make a suggestion like, oh, you know, maybe you can give Brianna a cup of juice, and then the other child's initiating that social. And what I found is once those social connections form in the play, a lot of times children, they're just much more engaged during center time then, once they make really friends, you know. And sometimes I've seen where just doing the play support, even if that wasn't the time of day, center time, where we were seeing a problem with behavior, sometimes the behavior challenges at circle time or transitions or lunch decrease or stop for the most part, because it's just changed, I think, this is my theory, the child's whole experience of being in the classroom, right? So when if you think even for us as adults, when we go to a party or a professional event, when we know someone there and we have a friend or a colleague who we feel comfortable with, it can change our whole, hopefully we're not, throwing chairs or, punching anyone if we're nervous at an event. But once we make that social connection, it can just change our whole experience of the environment and the event. And sometimes I've even seen, and this goes back to include when I was working as a floating special ed teacher, I've seen children where when I've used this method and they advance in the play, I've seen huge language spurts where they go from, 2 to 3 words they're using to, once they're motivated to play, they're saying, I want to go to the blocks and play with big trucks with Michael. They're just busting out with these huge sentences to express themselves once they're motivated.
So it almost seems like there's a lot of indirect benefits that come out of this as well that aren't so obvious at the time.
Yeah, I think so. And again, that's why I say, I think, I have some other methods I teach, like for transitions and circle time, that I think are a little more obvious in their short-term benefits, and they're things that you don't need to come to, like, the improv. I definitely feel like, if you read my article on it, that could help. If you come to a 2-hour training with me, that's great. But if I'm there coaching teachers week to week, they're going to really see the most impact. I do have other things I teach that, are much more straightforward in terms of you can just change your language a little or add something you're doing and see a result tomorrow.
Yeah, and let me just touch on that point briefly, because it does seem like it is a challenging methodology to implement in the classroom. Your example being a perfect one. What are some of the challenges that you see that people face when they try to implement the improv-based play support in their classrooms?
Mm-hmm. I think the biggest thing is getting stuck when teachers get what I would call a bad offer. When the child does something they don't want them to do or doesn't go. But I would take the example of children banging blocks. So one of the little boys that I did this directly with, he would go to the block area and he wouldn't necessarily build with the blocks. Most of the time he would bang them. And so rather than trying to get him immediately to build the blocks, I just went in and mirrored that and bang the blocks, and then I tried banging the blocks in a very small pattern of doing, 2 bangs and then a pause, and he followed me. And so from there, I could do bang the blocks, stack the blocks, and but that wasn't what I wanted, right? I wanted him to build with the blocks. And I think one example I will give you is I had a teacher that I was supervising. Actually, she was the same teacher who said this method taught her to be responsive. I learned so much from working with her. She had said she had a little boy who was one of these who really didn't engage during center time. So she was like, how can I use this method if he won't even stay in one area? And then she had a lot of terrariums in her class of different animals. It was kind of amazing, actually. I really admired that. I would, not be able to keep up with that myself. But she said all he wanted to do, the only thing he would stay with was go to observe some of the animals. And so what we decided together was that she would kind of really play with that. And so she got out a special hat and, her clipboard and magnifying glasses. And she said, let's go observe the animals. And he just loved it immediately, And so that was originally, she felt stuck. She couldn't even get him into one of the centers. But I was like, no, that's a center in and of itself. We'll build with that. And so they made a really nice connection, and he started following her lead more as soon as she started doing that, and he would get the hat as a way to initiate that play with her.
And what I really like about some of these examples as well is, first of all, they really bring it to life, but also I think it really emphasizes as well the skills that early childhood educators apply with creativity and using their energy and patience to work with children in these situations. It's really phenomenal, and really, creates that inclusive and responsive environment that you've mentioned. So it really sounds like an excellent method. If I'm listening to the podcast now and I want to go learn more information about this method or about your work, where would I go to do that?
Well, you can definitely go to my website, which is transformchallengingbehaviors.com, and read a little bit more about it there. And if you go to my publications page, there's a link where actually you can Google improvisational play interventions. And I have an article that I published through the journal Young Children. And so the article does come up if you Google. I used to call it improvisational play interventions. It's kind of a little more special ed sounding name, but then as the years went on, I started calling it improv-based play support.
Got it. And I also noticed on your website that you have a challenging behavior cheat sheet, which sounds like a really useful tool as well.
Yeah, and there's a little bit about the play support method in there, but it also includes tips for teachers that they can use during transitions and circle time. So one thing that I really promote is this idea of using the word "let's" in talking to children. For an example, a lot of times we might tell them what to do, or of course we want to offer them choices, but sometimes I see, and I fall into myself, of saying to children, are you ready to clean up? It's like, no, it's cleanup time. You got to clean up. So using "let's" or "let's wash our hands so we can see what we have for lunch," rather than, just telling them what to do, because for the most part, most of us don't really like being told what to do.
Right, yeah.
And then also during circle time, I studied 2 different methods of interactive oral storytelling when I was doing my research, and I learned that just the word "let's" is a really great way to invite children to participate in circle time. And so I recommend finding ways to say to children, let's all say that and let's all do that, which I learned from a colleague of mine, Helen Wheelock, at the Creative Arts team in New York. She trains teachers in storytelling, and it's a very interactive method. And it's a great way for teachers who are struggling during circle time with children's behavior. So there's obviously, I can't in my cheat sheet teach how to do interactive oral storytelling, but I'm borrowing some of those strategies that teachers can use.
Sounds like some awesome resources online on your site, and also some great strategies and tactics and tools and tips right here on this podcast. So thanks so much for coming on the show and sharing all that with us, Barb.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's really a pleasure. And I wanted to just mention, I also have a resource for directors on my website if anyone's listening and is interested on assessing what kind of help you might need with challenges.
You can hear me?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me now? Great. Yeah.
Great. One second. Okay, so we're going to get started with our Q&A right now, and follow up. Maybe Barb, because we had a little bit of static there at the bottom end of the podcast while you were giving some really good examples of your experiences in working with children and animals and responsive working. So maybe before we jump into the questions, you can expand on the end of that story for us and some of your experience that's really practical for early educators.
Sure. I mean, I heard everything, and I don't know what other people heard. I heard it till the very end when I was talking about a resource for directors on my site. So do you mean the story? I think Ron had asked me, what is the biggest challenge educators run into? And I was talking about when you are working to implement the play support and the children or child who you want to help does something that you're not expecting or that you don't like, which actually, I guess, the first story where I shared about the girl with the blanket and the baby doll was similar in that way too. You know, I think that's the thing, is that it's a very organic method, and it's just, it never looks like what you expect it to necessarily. But was there a specific part that you thought I should say something about?
No, not necessarily. I think it's helpful to hear. Maybe that lets us jump into our first question, which is sort of related, which is I'd love to know most about what excites you about your work, what you love most about the type of work that you're doing in both working with children and with educators.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think what I really enjoy is that with this play support method or some of the strategies that I teach for example, circle time or transitions in terms of, you know, using puppets at circle time to better capture children's attention and keep them focused, or making up songs for transitions, which obviously everybody does at, or a lot of teachers do for cleanup. But I think I refer to it as songs with directions embedded. I think it's an underused strategy that we can really kind of sing through the day with children. And if we sing the directions 8 or 9 times, we don't feel frustrated in the same way we would if we had to say it 8 or 9 times. So one thing that's really fun and exciting for me is that when whether it's the play support or these circle time and transition methods, I feel like every teacher can really take it in their own, give it their own spin and take it in their own direction, you know, that it's never going to look I mean, we could borrow songs from each other and certainly steal ideas, and it's still something that I think I see teachers who attend my trainings or when I'm coaching them, they can really be creative and take it in their own way. I'm not trying to get them to do something in one right way, you know? I feel like it's developmental for both the children and the teachers and me, that I learn from the teachers I'm working with.
I think that's definitely one of my favorite parts about working in the childcare sector, working with educators, is that there's this passion to learn and a willingness to explore and grow in your career beyond just the fact that so many of us are teachers. I really like that about what you're doing. I'd like to jump to some questions because our YouTube chat, thank you for all the feedback on audio. It sounds like we're doing okay now, so please send that back if anybody else is having trouble hearing. And I'm going to jump right into some of the questions because you have a few here. So there's a question here around which schools have successfully implemented this method. Is there a type of school or a type of age group that you found where improv play-based support has been particularly effective?
Mm-hmm. I think what's interesting is that I was mostly in my last years in the classroom working in preschools, and I have mostly worked with programs that are serving preschoolers, and predominantly Head Start programs and campus-based centers. I don't think that is because the approach is more effective in those settings. I think it's because those settings have more access to professional development funds. So, you know, I've done some work and I offer customized private webinars for childcare centers and preschoolers if they, you know, can't afford to bring me to them, or they just want to do something for 2 hours. So there's ways that I can work with those programs, but in terms of the programs where I've been able to do multiple trainings and or ongoing coaching, it's predominantly been Head Start and campus-based centers. However, I've also done, I've taught the improv-based play support to early intervention home visitors, working with infant and toddlers and families, and doing a lot of family coaching. And it's a great method to use in that context too, in terms of supporting children's use of materials. So they might not be at the infant toddler age going to the cooperative play yet, but just in terms of playing with an adult and sustaining materials, and that, you know, you can coach families in how to do that in a way, because the push right now is really to use the materials in the home and to build on family strengths. So I guess there could be some information sharing in terms of the value of supporting children's play, but it's really a medium where you can, you know, build on what the parents are already doing or the family members, and do that in a way that's improvisational, you know? So those are I've done less with like elementary school or the, you know, early childhood in that sector, but I think it's certainly applicable there too, especially if we actually give children time to play in those settings, which unfortunately, even in kindergarten, we're not always seeing these days, but yeah.
I would love to see it in higher ed and even graduate studies too. It would be so interesting to see improv, and I've seen some in sort of corporate training before in different places where improv training becomes really successful. Higher ed, I think, would be a really great place for it as well. Really valuable services. We have another question here from Jen. She says, how could improv play support be applied to professional development of educators? Which you sort of touched on, but maybe you can expand on that for her question.
I think it, because there was one more thing I wanted to say when you started asking the question, but I think it's actually connected, that I just thought it might be interesting for your listeners to know that, as you say, there is this use of training adults in improv in the corporate world. And actually the community that I learned it from, I learned that people all over the world are training professionals in improv, in, you know, training doctors, training lawyers, physical therapists, librarians, that it really has been found in an array of contexts to, you know, it helps us listen. It helps us work collaboratively. And so it's a very powerful tool, not just for children's play, but it gives adults a chance to play. And it's, you know, when you play the games, they're not competitive, they're collaborative. So it really helps us with our, you know, playing with others or working with others. So I know there are some folks who have written, or someone just told me they went to a session at NAYC where I've presented on the play support, but they went to one where they learned improv as a tool to go back and do with their staff for teamwork. So I think, you know, if you're experienced with improv as a professional in early childhood, like, do it with your colleagues or your staff, you know, and if not, to think about whether it doesn't have to be me, but whether it's me or someone else, bring someone in to train teachers, both to improve the workplace culture, and then if you want to make this leap, to use it to support children's play. Yeah. Did I answer the question though? Because I got excited about this other stuff I wanted to share.
If it didn't, then whoever's some of our viewers right now, please feel free to re-ask a question or ask for some clarity if you want it. We're definitely happy to keep going there.
It's used for professional development, or right?
Yes, yeah, professional development of educators. Okay, so I'm just going to meet those. All right. So the next question is moving on to your resources. So we had talked about that before, and I think now that we're talking to professional development of educators and bringing it into the classroom to do with your teachers or also with students, and I really liked your point about parents and having parents support this type of play-based learning at home. Could you tell us more about some of the resources, either that we can read about the methodology and also some of the ones that you have to offer to our viewers today?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think, you know, I have 2 articles on this. One was published in Young Children, the NAYC Journal. That's our National Early Childhood Organization in the U.S., if folks don't know. And then one that was published in their Teaching Young Children Journal. So it's kind of a shorter version of the original article. So I think both of those are great resources, and they are listed on my website. If you go to the About and then to the Publications section, you can find the links. I think the first one, which I referenced in the podcast, Improvisational Play Interventions, I think it's a downloadable PDF, even though they say you're supposed to be a member, but that one I think some of them come up free to everybody. The other one, I think you do have to be a member for that. But I think that, you know, the parents who attend my trainings, and because obviously a lot of early childhood teachers are also parents or families with young children. So I think that those, while I wrote it for teachers, are probably the best resource for families as well.
That's awesome. I really, I think you've got some really great resources, and looking at the associations and also places online where people can go and do some extra reading is great. And we're definitely going to make a point to share out your resources with all of everybody who signed up for the podcast, everybody's clicked through, and we'll send it out through social and Facebook and our email list as well. So we'll make sure to get your resources out there to everyone who's joined us today. I'm just going to take a quick look over here to see if there's any other questions. And while I'm doing so, I hear you.
Can I add one more thing? Well, I was thinking that about NAYC also has articles especially for parents and families on there. So if you're looking for just like a short 1 or 2 page that conveys the value of play to families, I think they have something on there.
Great. Thank you so much. So we're going to close out because we have just a few minutes left. So if there's any other questions, please stick them into the chat now. Yes, we will absolutely. I see somebody asking about the links. We absolutely will share those links with you. And certainly I'm going to just put up Barb's website and resources right now for you. But before I do that, I'll just pass the mic back over to Barb to see if you have any closing thoughts.
Sure. Thank you so much. I guess the one thing I would just mention to folks is that to make sure that they know that if they download the cheat sheet, I will they'll hear from me about once every 2 weeks. I don't email folks a lot, but I send a little post a little note when I publish something on my blog. So with different strategies, or obviously if I'm doing something like this, I'll let everyone know, because it's really important to me. I know most childcare centers and preschools don't have funding for professional development in-house, so I want to find a way to work with those programs that's free online, or I host a Q&A just audio-wise. So if you sign up for my list, which you'll be on if you download the cheat sheet, I'll let you know. And if you are a program or director who's interested in exploring the possibility, I do trainings ranging from 1 day to 3 days. I have a day-long training on the improv-based play sport. I can also do a little bit shorter version of that for sure. And I do, as I said, for programs who are not in my area, I'm in Southern California, I do webinars where it's, a personalized, customized webinar, and then we have Q&A just for your staff. So my email you can get to on my website. It's just barb@transformchallengingbehavior.com if any of those sound intriguing to you. But this was great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Barb, for joining us. I appreciate you taking the time on a Friday at the end of the week. We know we all have busy weeks, and certainly September is a very busy time for all of us. So very much want to express our gratitude for your time and your energy, and have a great weekend.
Thank you. You too.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. And Joyce week.